I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and the sound echoed through the empty church. The air inside was thick with dust, and every step stirred it up like smoke. I had come here chasing a perfect shot, a forgotten place that could make my portfolio stand out. The church had been abandoned for decades, but its bones were still intact. Tall stained glass windows loomed over me, their colors faded but still clinging to life. I set down my camera bag near the first row of pews. Silence pressed in from all sides. I snapped a few photos, adjusting angles, trying to catch the fractured light coming through the glass. The silence was so complete that every click of the shutter sounded louder than it should. At the far end of the church stood the organ. It was massive, carved from dark wood, its pipes stretching toward the ceiling like a forest of metal. I felt a pull toward it. Dust coated the keys, but the instrument still looked powerful. I don't know why I did it, but I sat down and pressed a single key. The sound that came out was deeper than I expected, heavy, as if it carried weight. It didn't just echo, it lingered. A chill ran through me. I pressed another key, then another. The notes began to flow into each other, clumsy at first, then smoother. I knew only fragments of music, but my hands moved as if guided. The air inside the church shifted. That was when I heard it, a whisper, faint, almost hidden under the sound of the organ. I froze, fingers hovering above the keys. The whisper faded when I stopped. My chest tightened. I tried again, hitting a low chord. This time, the whisper grew clearer. It wasn't just one voice, it was many. Dozens. They blended together into a hushed chorus that rose and fell with each note I played. I turned to look at the pews. Shadows stretched across the walls, moving in ways the dim light couldn't explain. For a second I thought I saw figures, rows of them, sitting in silence, their heads bowed. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe my own nerves. That the moment I played another sequence, the figures lifted their heads. Their mouths opened, and the whisper became words. I couldn't understand them at first. They overlapped, repeating, cutting through one another like fragments of broken glass. Some were pleading, some sounded angry, others were only weeping. I stood, ready to back away, but something inside me forced me to sit again. My hands pressed down on the keys without my command. The sound swelled, and the voices rose with it. Then I understood. They weren't singing, they were repeating their last words. Each broken line cut into me. A man's voice begging for forgiveness. A woman whispering a child's name. Someone gasping for help that never came. Dozens of unfinished sentences, layered on top of one another, clinging to the air. The shadows along the walls deepened. Shapes began to crawl out of them. They didn't walk. They swayed, like smoke, caught in wind. But their faces became clearer with each note I played. I felt the sound press into me, heavy, pulling at my chest. My breathing grew shallow. My fingertips trembled on the keys. When I tried to stop, I couldn't. My hands slammed down harder, forcing the chords out faster. The chorus grew louder, filling every corner of the church. Their words cut into me, repeating over and over, as if they were trying to force themselves into my mind. The air turned cold. My reflection in the organ's polished wood shifted. My face blurred, stretched, like it was dissolving. That was when I understood. The longer I played, the less of me remained. My thoughts were fading, replaced by fragments of voices that weren't mine. The choir wasn't just echoing the dead, it was pulling me into its song. And I had already played too long. My fingers slammed against the keys as if someone else controlled them. The sound shook the walls, and the whispers grew into a deafening chant. My vision blurred. Every shadow in the church leaned forward, faces pale and stretched, mouths moving in unison. I tried to pull my hands back, but they wouldn't move. My wrists ached, tendons burning, yet the chords poured out faster and faster. With every note, the figures around me sharpened. They weren't just shadows anymore, they were people. Their skin was gray, their eyes hollow, but their lips repeated the same dying words I had heard before. The pews filled, row after row, a full congregation of the dead, their heads turned toward me. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe. They only spoke in broken fragments of their final moments. I felt something cold seep into me. Not like air, but like hands pushing through my chest, reaching inside. My heartbeat stuttered. My breath caught. I wasn't just hearing their voices anymore. They were sliding into my own thoughts, overlapping with mine. I tried to shout, to scream, but when I opened my mouth, another voice came out. Not mine. A low, trembling cry of a man begging for mercy. The sound didn't stop. A second voice followed, a woman sobbing her child's name. Then another, a desperate whisper that begged for the light to return. My throat belonged to them now. The organ's echo wrapped around me, each vibration pulling a piece of me away. My memories felt thin, faces I once knew blurred. I tried to picture my parents, my friends, anyone, but their images slipped like water through my hands. All that remained was the echo. The dead congregation rose from the pews. They swayed as one, their feet not touching the ground. The closer they drifted, the colder I became. I could feel them brushing against me, trying to drag me into their rows. I fought harder, pressing my back against the bench, forcing my hands up. For the first time, my fingers lifted from the keys. The sound cut off sharp and sudden. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Every face in the church turned toward me, dozens of hollow eyes fixed on mine. The whispers didn't stop. They grew sharper, angrier, overlapping, clawing into my skull. My ears rang, my head burned. Then the organ moved on its own. The keys sank, pressing down without touch. A single chord rang out, and my body lurched forward. My palms slammed back onto the keyboard. The chant roared, louder than before. The walls trembled. Dust fell from the rafters. The stained glass rattled. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. I realized it wasn't the church that was shaking. It was me. My body was becoming part of the echo. My outline flickered in the polished wood, pieces of me vanishing with every vibration. My reflection's mouth opened, but it didn't speak in my voice. It joined the choir. My vision tunneled. I couldn't feel my hands anymore, only the weight of sound pulling me under. The congregation leaned closer, their arms stretched toward me, their mouths open wide. The echo swelled until there was nothing else. I understood then. The organ didn't make music, it harvested it. Every note was a soul, stripped, bound, replayed forever in that cursed choir, and my voice had already joined them. The first time I pushed open that wooden door, I thought I had just found another relic for tourists. The church stood at the edge of a small town in upstate New York. Its roof was sagging, windows dusty, and the sign outside had long since faded. I had walked in only because the rain forced me to look for shelter. Inside, the air was heavy. Not the kind of heaviness you expect in an abandoned place, but something that pressed on my chest. I walked between the pews, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. That was when I noticed the booth in the corner, the confessional. Its door hung slightly open, like it had been waiting. The wood was cracked, the metal handle green with corrosion. I should have ignored it, but instead I stepped closer. The hinges groaned when I touched it. The sound was followed by a whisper. "Confess." I froze. I wanted to believe it was the wind slipping through broken glass, but the voice was too close, too clear. Against my better judgment, I leaned inside. The booth smelled of old wood and damp stone. The screen was covered with dust, yet behind it I felt a presence. "Confess," the voice said again, lower now. I whispered the first thing that came to my mind. A memory I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Something I had done back in college, a secret I had carried alone. My voice trembled as I said it. The moment the words left me, something shifted in the darkness beyond the screen. A shape moved and I pulled back, heart pounding. I told myself I was imagining it, but when I turned, I saw the shadow. It was me, or at least it looked like me. A darker outline stretched across the wall of the church. Its head tilted when I moved. Its body leaned forward when I took a step back. I ran to the entrance, but the door would not budge. It felt like iron, even though I knew it had been light when I came in. Behind me, the whisper returned, more insistent. More. I don't know why I obeyed. Maybe because I thought it would free me. I went back to the booth and spoke another secret. Something I had hidden from my parents years ago. The shadow swelled, its edges thickened. It detached from the wall and began to move on its own. The figure copied my posture, my hands, even the way I breathed. Only its face stayed dark, featureless, like a mask of smoke. I stumbled backward, pressing my spine against the cold wall of the church. My mind raced, searching for explanations. A trick of the light, my imagination, stress. But the shadow followed every step I took, its feet silent on the cracked floor. When I stopped, it stopped. When I raised my hand, it raised its own. But then it did something I hadn't done. It smiled. My stomach dropped. The mouth stretched wide, though no eyes appeared above it. Just the grin, white and sharp against the void. I ran again, this time toward the side door, but it too was locked. I kicked at it until my foot ached, but it didn't give. The whisper was everywhere now, seeping from the walls, the ceiling, even the broken stained glass. Confess, confess. I screamed at the empty church. I have nothing left. The whisper grew louder. The shadow drew closer. Its grin opened wider until the blackness inside seemed deeper than the booth itself. I realized then that this thing wasn't going to stop. Not until it took everything I had buried. Not until every sin, every guilt, every regret was pulled out of me. The confessional door creaked again, though I hadn't touched it. I looked back at the booth and saw the wood splinter, as if something was pushing from inside. A pale hand reached out, fingers too long, nails sharp enough to scrape lines into the floorboards. The shadow stood beside it, still smiling, waiting for me to speak again. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened. I felt trapped not just in the church but inside my own memories. Every wrong choice I had made clawed to the surface, demanding to be voiced. I backed into the last pew, clutching the wood as the booth opened wider. A voice, louder now, filled the air. Confess, or remain. I stood frozen in the pew, my knuckles white against the splintered wood. The booth was fully open now. The hand that had crawled out was followed by an arm, then a shoulder. What emerged looked human at first, but the skin was too pale, almost translucent, and the movements were too deliberate. The shadow beside it leaned closer, still wearing that stretched grin. I shook my head. No more. You're not real. But the figure kept coming. Its body unfolded from the booth like it had been hiding there for years, waiting. It stopped halfway onto the aisle and tilted its head the way a predator studies its prey. You confessed lies, the voice said, though no lips moved. It came from everywhere again, filling my skull. More truth, or you remain. I couldn't stop shaking. My voice cracked when I shouted back. I told you the truth. The shadow stepped forward. Its feet made no sound, yet the boards groaned under my own as I retreated. I tripped against the edge of the pew and nearly fell. Panic clawed at me. I thought of my phone, but when I grabbed it, the screen flickered and died in my hand. The battery had been nearly full. No service, no light, just dead. The pale figure took another step. Its head turned toward me, and for the first time I saw its face. It wasn't blank like the shadow. It wore my own features, twisted into something off. The eyes were too dark, the mouth too wide. I whispered without meaning to. "That's not me." It smiled wider, showing teeth that were sharper than mine could ever be. The whisper thundered again. "Confess." Memories clawed up, uninvited. The time I betrayed a friend and never admitted it. The moment I lied to save myself while someone else took the blame. My throat burned as I spoke them out loud, my voice breaking. Each word made the figure stronger. Its shoulders straightened. Its skin darkened. The shadow and the pale double merged into one, standing taller than me now. I wanted to stop, but the door behind me slammed shut on its own. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The stained glass window rattled in its frame. I understood that the only way out was to keep speaking. So I did. I spilled every hidden truth I had carried. Things I had sworn never to say. Each confession was like ripping out a piece of myself and handing it over. The figure absorbed them, its form solidifying until it looked fully real, fully alive. Finally, I had nothing left. My mind was empty, my chest hollow. The figure stepped close, its breath cold against my face. For the first time, its voice was singular, not the echoing whisper. It spoke in my exact tone. "You are free now." I blinked, and the church door swung open on its own. The night air rushed in cool and sharp. My legs shook as I stumbled outside, desperate to put distance between me and that place. But when I looked back, I saw it. Through the crack of the open door, the figure still stood there. It didn't retreat into the booth. It didn't fade. It only watched me, smiling. And then I noticed the shadow on the ground at my feet. It wasn't mine anymore. It moved before I did. I pushed open the heavy church doors, and the hinges let out a metallic groan that echoed through the empty hall. Dust spiraled in the air as a thin beam of light passed through the stained glass above me. The job was simple, at least on paper. I was sent here to examine the windows and prepare them for removal. Some museum in the city wanted them preserved before the whole building collapsed from age. I set my bag down and walked closer to the first panel. The colors were still vivid, even though centuries had passed. Red, blue, and green shards formed the faces of saints and townsfolk, all locked in frozen poses. Their eyes shone strangely, as if the glass itself carried a memory. I leaned in. That was when I noticed something that unsettled me. The face staring back looked too detailed. The wrinkles, the tired mouth, even the hint of sadness in the eyes, all felt alive. It was not the kind of design you would expect from medieval artists. I stepped back, trying to shake off the unease, but as the light shifted, another panel caught my attention. This one showed a young woman, her features sharp, her expression tense. I could almost hear her voice in the back of my head whispering. The words were too faint to understand, yet the tone was accusing, heavy, like a warning. The silence of the church pressed in. I pulled out my notebook, jotting down notes about the strange craftsmanship. But each time I lifted my head, the faces in the glass looked a little different. The expression shifted. Eyes seemed to follow. Mouths looked closer to forming words. By the third panel, I stopped writing. My hand shook. I leaned in, pressing my flashlight to the glass. That was when I heard it clearly. A man's voice, low, whispering. Confession never saved them. I spun around, but the hall was empty. My light beam shook across pews covered in dust. No one stood behind me, yet the whisper had been close, too close, right at my ear. I returned my gaze to the stained glass, and the man depicted there stared at me with unblinking eyes. His hand pointed toward the altar. My pulse quickened. I did not want to look, but something compelled me. The altar was cracked, its cloth eaten by time. Behind it, more windows rose, higher and darker. I raised my flashlight, and what I saw made my throat tighten. Dozens of faces filled the panes. Men, women, even children. all rendered with unnatural precision, as though each was a portrait of a real person, and every single one looked directly at me. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, blending into a hiss that filled the church. Words broke through in fragments. Lies. Guilt. Punishment. I stumbled backward, my shoulder knocking against a pew. The sound rang sharp in the hollow space. At that moment, the glass cracked. A thin fracture ran across one of the faces, right through the eye. I froze, watching as the shard shifted slightly, not from the wind, but as though something beneath it had moved. The eye rolled. I dropped my flashlight. It clattered to the stone floor, the beam spinning wildly across the walls. The eyes in the glass followed it, shifting, adjusting, tracking the light. My breath came fast. My legs screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stand still. If I fled, the building would claim me. That thought struck me hard, as if the church itself had placed it in my head. I whispered to myself, "This place feeds on fear." The air grew colder. My reflection appeared in the cracked panel, but it did not mimic me. My glass double blinked, and then it smiled. I froze in place, staring at my reflection trapped inside the glass. It was me, but it was not me. The figure blinked again, tilting its head as though mocking my confusion. My stomach tightened. The whispers in the church grew clearer. They were no longer fragments, but sentences. They believed him. They paid with silence. Now you must join them. I backed away from the panel, my footsteps echoing across the stone floor. The faces in every window shifted, their glass eyes sliding to follow. A faint crack echoed from above, then another. The sound spread through the church like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Shards trembled in their frames, yet none fell. Instead, the fractures multiplied, crossing the faces like veins. Each eye twitched and rolled, alive, searching. I whispered out loud, "This isn't possible." But the church answered with movement. The largest panel behind the altar groaned. A figure, a priest with a stern face, pressed both palms against the glass as though trying to push through. His lips moved, and this time the voice came clearly, not from my head, but from the entire hall. "Confess." The word struck my chest like a blow. I clutched my ribs, struggling to breathe. My mind raced. Confess to what? I had no connection to these people, no role in their suffering. I was just here to study glass. The priest's face darkened. His eyes narrowed, rolling upward before snapping back to me. Around him, the other portraits mouthed the same word, their whispers turning into a chant. Confess, confess, confess. I stumbled toward my bag, my only thought to escape. But when I reached the doors, they would not move. The wood, rotted and weak only moments ago, felt like solid stone under my hands. I shoved my shoulder against it, but the frame did not even shake. From behind me the chant rose. The voices now spoke in unison, deep and endless. The windows rattled. A long crack tore through one of the child's faces, splitting it from forehead to chin. The pieces shifted, the mouth opening wide. "Fear is the offering." The words shook the pews. My flashlight flickered, then died. The only light left was the glow from the stained glass, burning brighter than it should have, as if lit from within. I turned, my back pressed to the locked doors. The priest in the window raised his hand, and the other faces mirrored him. Slowly, I felt a pull in my chest, a pressure dragging me forward. My legs betrayed me, stepping toward the altar against my will. "No," I whispered, digging my nails into my palms. "You can't have me." But the pull grew stronger. My reflection in the cracked panel moved closer to the surface, pressing forward as if it would break through and trade places with me. Its eyes were wild, desperate, hungry. I grabbed the nearest object, a loose piece of wood from a pew, and hurled it at the glass. The impact rang like a bell, echoing through the church. The shard cracked deeper, but instead of breaking, the face laughed. The sound of my own laugh, twisted, distorted. The chant roared. The priest shouted above them all, "You are ours." At that moment, instinct drove me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the one thing I had brought for safety, a small hammer used for testing stone. My grip tightened. If the church wanted me afraid, I had to do the opposite. I ran forward and smashed the nearest window. The glass exploded, shards scattering across the floor. A scream erupted, not human, not earthly, a howl of rage and hunger. The light dimmed instantly, plunging the hall into shadows. I turned to the next panel and struck again. Another face shattered. Another scream tore through the air. The pull on my chest weakened just slightly, enough for me to catch my breath. I smashed a third, then a fourth. Each one fell with a howl that rattled the rafters. But as I raised the hammer again, I realized something horrifying. The shattered pieces on the ground were not lifeless. The fragments crawled, twitching like insects, dragging themselves toward me. Faces still stared from the shards, broken but alive. I kicked them aside and kept swinging. My arms ached, sweat blurred my eyes, but I refused to stop. Finally, with one last strike, I shattered the priest's image. His scream thundered through the church, shaking the walls. The glow died completely. Silence fell. I stood trembling in the dark, surrounded by broken glass that no longer moved. My lungs burned. My hammer slipped from my hand and clanged on the stone. When I finally pushed against the doors, they opened easily. Morning light streamed in, pure and steady. I stepped outside, the air cold but real, the sky pale with dawn. I looked back only once. The windows were empty now, only hollow frames left behind. No faces, no light, just silence. Yet as I turned to leave, a thought cut into me like a knife. In the shard of glass still stuck to my boot, I saw a reflection. It blinked.